Krishna, dear devotees, a very warm welcome back again to our ongoing series on the glories of our beloved Sri Vrindavan Dham. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya, Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale, Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane, Namaste Saraswati Deve, Gauravani Pacharine, Nivishesha Shunyavadi Pastrita Deshatarne. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So, today's class will be a little short, so you please forgive me. I have some important errands to do here in New Delhi, but I didn't want to disappoint you, so we're giving this class. And I'd like to continue with our theme of wandering throughout Vrindavan. Of course, it's a responsible wandering, because we are all searching after the holy places where Radha and Krishna perform their transcendental pastimes. It's not like, to use a modern term, footloose and fancy-free. You must have heard that terminology, footloose and fancy-free. Actually, it's a phrase from the 16th century. But actually, it has a fairly significant meaning. It translates as, quote, having no attachments, especially romantic ones, and thus free to do as one pleases. It's interesting. Of course, in our wanderings in Braj, we have a fixed purpose, Eke Kurunandana, and we have the best guides. In fact, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu sent the 6 Goswamis to Vrindavan for this express purpose, to map out the holy tirthas for past, present, and future pilgrims. And for that, they too wandered around Vrindavan. And due to their very pure, deep spiritual vision, they discovered so many Leela stones. And when they did, they would sit down in those sacred places and, as Prabhupada puts it, write books on the science of Krishna consciousness. Srila Rupa Goswami, for example, wrote 3 scriptures, Ujjvala Nilamani, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and Utkalika Valari, under a tree in the middle of sacred Sevakunj. Sevakunj is where Radha and Krishna have many of their loving pastimes, especially their rasa dance. It's one of the places where they have rasa dance. And it's considered a very, very special part of Vrindavan, where the most cherished, loving pastimes take place. Sevakunj, Nidhivan, Jamuna, and they take place in the Kadamba Vrikshas. Kadamba Vriksha means those, the trees come together and they bow, they bow down, they bow over, and they make like little places where Radha and Krishna can come in and have their loving discussions and their laughter, etc. Like Kunja Bihari we sing before the Bhagavatam class in the morning. Radha Kunja Bihari. Like that. So in these places, this part of Vrindavan, there's very sweet pastimes, but only for the closest of Krishna's associates. Now, our beloved Srila Rupa Goswami preferred those places because in the spiritual world, we know that he is Shri Rupa Manjari, a very intimate servant of Shri Radha. In the Gandharva Sampartan Ashtakam, Sri Rupa Goswami mentions that in those pastimes during Rasa Leela, Radharani's ankle bells ring. And that sound has the ability to shake the 3 worlds, it's described, or he describes, and thus attract everyone's attention. But these are, you could say, confidential pastimes. They're not for everyone's attention. So Rupa Goswami describes in that Shastra that one of his services in the spiritual world as Sri Rupa Manjari is that he places the dust of Braj on Sri Radha's ankle bells to keep them quiet. Of course, those pastimes are also manifest on this earth in Sri Vrindavan Dham. So this is one of Rupa Goswami's services in the spiritual world, is to put Brajarenu on Radharani's ankle bells. They don't make too much noise and others can come and see. They're wonderful, very sweet, loving pastimes, Ras Leela. And so that no one disturbs, or you could say sees, this charming dancing of Radha and Krishna and the gopis. This dancing is done in the evening or into the night where there's very little light or no light. And it's written that only when the eyes of Sri Radha reflect with the Kaustubha Mani of Krishna, the famous jewel he wears around his neck, does some light reveal their pleasing dancing. I thought that was really sweet. It's written only when the eyes of Sri Radhika reflect with the Kaustubha Mani of Krishna. You know that jewel he wears around his chest. When her eyes reflect in that Kaustubhi Mani, that Kaustubhi jewel, does some light appear to reveal their pleasing dancing for those that are participating. So 500 years ago, Rupa Goswami naturally chose to do his bhajan there in Sevakunj. Those pastimes took place 5,000 years ago. Of course, they're eternal. But 500 years ago, when he was living in Vrindavan, wandering in Vrindavan, he very often chose to stay in Sevakunj. And at that time, it's not like we see it now. It's all kind of built up, and there's lots of shops, and there's some gardens, but lots of buildings. It was just the groves of Vrindavan. So he would sit under a banyan tree there. And many scholars would come and meet with him to discuss the scriptures. And as we know, our 6 Goswamis would meet to plan out the how to develop Vrindavan, and what's more, how to spread this Krishna consciousness movement all over the world. This all took place in Sevakunj. And of course, in time, the temple of Radha Damodar was constructed close to that spot, the temple of Srila Jiva Goswami. He had his temple constructed there, very close to where Rupa Goswami was doing his bhajan. Now later, when Srila Rupa Goswami departed, the Vaishnavas built a very simple samadhi under the tree that he did bhajan in Sevakunj. Actually, it was just like, it was, he was put into samadhi under the ground, but there was just a little platform there to mark that particular spot. That's how they did it in those days. It wasn't until about 150 years ago that the present samadhi that we see now, it's a very beautiful samadhi. It wasn't until 150 years ago that the present samadhi we see now was constructed. Now, unfortunately, when they were constructing that samadhi, as he so well deserved, and where we go to take shelter at his lotus feet, when they were constructing that samadhi, the tree that he did bhajan under, which is where the samadhi was placed, it was destroyed. You can imagine, that tree was witnessing the writing of Sri Rupa Goswami, his ecstasies, his emotions, his bhav, his love, that tree, because everything in Vrindavan's personal. Everything's enlightened, purely enlightened with Krishna Prem. So that tree which witnessed all of his leelas there, it was destroyed. But fortunately at that time, one of the Goswami families, serving the deities in that Radha Damodar temple, which was present at that time, saved a certain portion of that tree. And today their descendants worship that branch in their ancestral home in Old Delhi. A branch which is 500 years old from that tree. And the other day I had the good fortune to visit that family. They're called the Mahabhagavat family, and have darshan of that branch of the tree. And many of you may have seen that I did a photo album of that day, going to that beautiful home with the beautiful Radha Krishna deities, and there's a sacred pot that Rupa Goswami used, a copper pot, which he would offer things to Govindaji. So I was able to have darshan of the branch of that tree. And I even got to hold that fragile branch in my hands. And as I did so, I was remembering that in Vilapa Kushmanjali, Raghunath Das Goswami says that Rupa Goswami always cried when he wrote down the Shastras, when he wrote down his Shastras. So Vaishnava historians, they say that tree under which Sri Rupa Goswami wrote the scriptures I mentioned earlier, absorbed his tears. He was crying under that tree, so the tears are going here, there, and everywhere. So that tree absorbed the tears of ecstasy of Sri Rupa Goswami. So when I was thinking like that, I put that branch onto my eyes. I put close to my eyes. And I prayed to see things as they are one day, to see these wonderful pastimes, all by the mercy of our spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada. Prayed for mercy. So we can understand that the all-merciful Srila Rupa Goswami is one of our guides in our wanderings around Braj. Srila Prabhupada writes in a purport in Upandesamrita, quote, "The Krishna conscious movement is conducted under the supervision of Sri Rupa Goswami." The Krishna conscious movement is conducted under the supervision of Srila Rupa Goswami. So therefore I say he's one of our guides in our wanderings around Braj, our real home. Because technically we're fortunate to be known as Rupanugas, followers in the line of Srila Rupa Goswami. And rightfully so, because Sri Rupa Goswami himself writes in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1, 2, verse 100, and I quote him, "The best way to search for the truth is to follow the path that has previously been gone over by saintly persons and devotees, and by which they have attained the supreme goal of life. Such a path is always free from all kinds of obstacles and hindrances to our progress, and by following it, one very quickly attains the desired result." And what is that result? Krishna Prema. All glories to Sri Rupa Goswami. So let's wander. That was the introduction. So let's wander. Yesterday I was reading about a very unique sacred tirtha called Shamadak. And on the edge of Shamadak is a garden known as Samai. Now its name is derived from the word Shama, because Krishna came to Srimati Radharani at this place dressed as a gopi by that name. The pastime actually begins at a rasa dance festival at Apsaravan, where for some reason Sri Radha became unhappy with the arrangements that Krishna had made for the rasa dance. And she left to pout, she left to sulk at this Shamadak. Krishna tried his best to appease her, but she didn't want to have anything to do with Krishna. So Vishaka suggested that Krishna approach Sri Radha in disguise. And as we well know, it's a means Krishna often uses to gain her favor. I think we've discussed 4 or 5 times how Krishna, he's in a disguise and he's able to come and ask for her forgiveness. So dressed as Shyamasaki and camouflaged as a gopi, he was able to approach her there and ask for her forgiveness. And of course, in time, Sri Radha forgave him. We could say it's keli, it's all playful, it's all fun, you could say. It's enjoyable. Because in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila 14:162, Kaviraj Goswami says, quote, because she, Radha, is a left-wing gopi, her womanly anger is always awakening. But Krishna derives transcendental bliss from her activities. Because she's a left-wing gopi, her womanly anger is always awakening. It's causing some disturbances. But Krishna derives transcendental bliss from her activities. So this is ultimately Keli Leela, playful, loving pastimes. Now, a similar exchange took place some distance from Shamadag. When Krishna appeared before Sri Radha, it's described on a winding road, in the guise of an elderly Brahminy woman. Krishna is disguising himself again. So some distance from Shamadag, he appeared before Radha in the disguise of an elderly Brahmana woman. Not as he often does as a very beautiful young girl, but this time an elderly Brahmini woman like that. And this pastime is very nicely described in Srila Jiva Goswami's Gopal Champu, Purva Champu 2988. Now when Krishna appeared before Radha, he's just walking in the disguise down the road because he appeared as an elderly Brahmini woman. Sri Radha naturally offered this elderly, scholarly woman some respect. And then this elderly Brahmini woman introduced herself as master of 5 things. Brahmanas are very expert in Vedic arts. So this elderly Brahmini woman, she introduced herself, Krishna, as very expert in astrology, yoga, rituals, mantras, as well as a benefactor of all the pious young girls of Braja. I really like that part. She's expert in astrology, yoga, rituals, mantra, as well. She said, I'm a benefactor of all the pious young girls in Braj. So it's written that, eager to know whether the stars could predict if she would be meeting with Krishna soon, Radharani asked the Brahmini, my dear Brahmini, O knower of all things, what is the topmost abode of happiness in all the 3 worlds? So this wise old woman very dramatically swept her hand like across the horizon, and she said, oh, the cowherd pasture land of Sri Krishna. O knower of all things, what is the topmost abode of happiness in all the 3 worlds? So the old Brahmana lady, she said, oh, the cowherd pasture land of Sri Krishna. So true. And surprised with such an agreeable answer, Sri Radha asked deeper philosophical questions. She saw this as an opportunity, a wise old woman. So Radha said, dear Brahmini, what is the foundation of happy life for all living entities within the universe? So without hesitation, the Brahmini replied, singing songs about Sri Krishna, the Prince of Vrindavan. So then Radharani, she paused and she thought, how is it this old lady is so Krishna conscious? and now very curious. Radha asked, dear Brahmini, what eagerness bestows incomparable auspiciousness? What eagerness bestows incomparable auspiciousness? So the old Brahmana woman, she smiled and replied, Dear girl, you should know that nothing ends in greater auspiciousness than the desire to obtain the company of Krishna. What an answer. Dear girl, you should know that nothing ends in greater auspiciousness than the desire to obtain the company of Krishna. So then Sri Radha came a little closer and looked into the Brahmini's face, where she saw what is described as unusual and usual, a twinkle in that old lady's eyes, which made Radha wonder, who is this Brahmini? A little suspicious. So thinking that no one else was around to hear, Radharani softly asked, Dear Brahmini, what is most enjoyable? What is most enjoyable? So the old woman sighed with longing and she said, what is most enjoyable? The beauty and sweetness of the transcendental Cupid, Sri Krishna. Now at this point, Sri Radha doubted that a complete stranger could disclose the confidential secrets of her heart. Because remember, she has the Mahabhav. She alone, Sri Radha, Madhavinda Puri, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they have the Mahabhav, the purest, greatest love for Krishna. So she's beginning to doubt, how could this complete stranger disclose these confidential secrets of her heart? So then Radha was thinking, either this Brahmini is truly all-knowing or a friend in disguise, so unable to restrain her curiosity, Srimati Radharani revealed her mind. She said, Oh, noble lady, you truly know everything. Now, what is the goal of all activities for all people, in all places, at all times? What a question. In Krishna consciousness, we always have perfect questions and perfect answers. This is coming from the mouth, the lotus mouth of Sri Radha, for our benefit as well. O noble lady, you truly know everything. So what is the goal of all activities for all people in all places for all time? That's the perfect question. So now it's very sweet. The old woman took a step towards Radharani and looked her straight in the eyes as she spoke, this time in Sri Krishna's voice. This time she spoke in Krishna's voice. And she said to Sri Radha, answering her question, the unrestricted attainment of Sri Krishna's company. Radha asked the Brahmini, O noble lady, you truly know everything, so what is the goal of all activities for all people in all places at all time? And the old lady answered in Krishna's voice, the perfect reply, the unrestricted attainment of Sri Krishna's company. That, dear Prabhus, is the goal of our lives. And we must never take our eye off the goal. Now, for a moment, it's written, neither Radha or Krishna could speak. They were stunned. But they looked around to see if anyone else was around. And when they saw there was no one, what did they do? They began to laugh so uncontrollably that only their embrace could steady them. Wow. They began to laugh so uncontrollably that only their embrace could steady them. And one Acharya concludes, may Krishna's fraudulent mischief, his prankish answers to Radha's cunning questions, protect us from all dangers of frivolous talks and the poison of unnecessary learning. Wow. May Krishna's fraudulent mischief, his prankish answers to Radha's cunning questions, protect us all from the dangers of frivolous talks and the poison of unnecessary learning. You have to excuse me, Prabhus. As I mentioned in the beginning, I have some very important seva to do today here in New Delhi, so I have to keep it a little bit short, but I think you have enough to transcendentally digest and benefit from, just purifying your hearts and awakening your attraction to Sri Vrindavan Dham and ultimately love for the divine couple. So I'll leave you with that, and I'll be back in a couple of days with some more of the glories of our beloved Sri Vrindavan Dham. So thank you. Shri Shri Gaur Nitai ki, Shri Shri Krishna Balaram ki, Shri Shri Radha Sham Sundar ki, Vrindavaneshwari Shrimati Radharani ki, Shri Krishna Balaram ki, Shri Shri Gaur Nitai ki, Shri Mayapur Dham ki, Golok Vrindavan Dham ki, Gokul Vrindavan Dham ki, and our most beloved Shri Prabhupada, the revealer of the Dham ki Jai Ho. Hare Krishna. Jai Jai Sisi Radhe Shyam. Hare Krishna.